A student recently shared a video with me from a channel called Less Impressed, More Involved BJJ, I think absolutely I will link this in the Substack, so please go check that out when you can. Um, and this guy is building this, he's calling it the outlier database, which is trying to aggregate, technique statistics, high percentage movements and stuff like that. It's a really great idea. Um, and I haven't really dove too deeply in on what it's going on. And I know it's a paid service and I have not paid for it yet, so I don't know what's going on with that. But as somebody who's kind of interested in these kind of statistics from a coaching strategy perspective, it seems like a useful thing. But this guy is going through and aggregating, hours and hours and hours of match footage. And I mean, he's specifically talking about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but then like he's looking at ADCC, which is much more broad than specifically just Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Has a different rule set than IBJJF, a better rule set than IBJJF. Was that too many J's? Anyway, you get what I'm saying. And one of the things that he brought up reminded me of an article, which, look, I tried to find it and I cannot find it. I don't remember if it was BJJEE or if it was Jiu-Jitsu Times or some other one. But there are several, let's call them blogs or article outlets for jiu-jitsu and submission grappling that have done kind of non-scientific observational studies of just fight footage. And, it's like where we find out that no, not even close to 90% of all fights go to the ground and things like that. But one of the things that they found, and this corresponds with this dude's video, is that in submission grappling matches, takedowns are incapable of predicting the winner. Essentially speaking, if you initiate or succeed in a takedown, it doesn't actually give you any better chance of winning than, if you're on the receiving end or you just don't, right? But here's the thing that he doesn't mention in his video, but was mentioned on this one article. And look, I'll look again before I publish this and see if I can find it, but no guarantees. But the thing is, this article cited something like, and they're watching like security cam footage and cell phone footage of, so many hours of street fights. And they found it was something like an 80+% chance of a successful takedown predicting the winner of the fight. And there's a stark difference between an 80% chance and kind of a 50-50, no predictability available. There's a pretty strong difference between those. And I actually think that there's a reasonable explanation for it. Now, I will admit, right, this is me just using logic and speculating on this. I don't have any actual data to back this up, but I feel like the logic certainly tracks. So there might be 3 reasons why street fight takedowns work and sport takedowns are not working. And I think these are pretty solid reasons. So let's look at them, right? Number one, and why your takedowns might not be working. Number one is when you're a trained martial artist, you are defending, at least if you're training in grappling to some degree, even a lot of traditional styles that just include throws, you're learning how to break falls very early on, and you're getting exposed to a number of falls very early on. So you get very used to the idea of falling in a way that allows you to control your descent, at least to a degree, so that you don't injure yourself and maybe that you can recover position or even counter from that position. And so the defensive training aspect, and this is assuming that the street fight videos don't include people who are particularly well trained, right? That could be an error of assumption. We don't have any background on these street fight videos. But defensive training is a very, very strong component of grappling training. If you learn how to go down and do something like pull guard when you're going down, or do something like pull them down with you and do something with that, or use break falls and rolling techniques to get away, break distance, or initiate a scramble or something, you can essentially find ways through that defensive training to nullify, for the large part, the effects of a takedown. That's a pretty strong evidence as to why you might not see takedowns working as well in sport matches, in specifically grappling. This guy wasn't looking at MMA to the best of my knowledge, and it would be interesting to see if MMA has any difference, because we do see some differences in even grappling outcomes from MMA because of the additional striking versus grappling outcomes in grappling only. The next, of course, is the environment, and this is huge. All of our sport environments have padded floors. And so on top of this defensive training, we are in a much more hospitable environment as opposed to hard ground, or even very specifically like asphalt and concrete, which can do some serious damage. It is much, much harder to break your fall, even if you're trained on something as hard as concrete, as opposed to a 2-inch thick mat. And now look, anybody that's done any level of wrestling on mats or fought in MMA or anything like that can tell you that getting slammed even on mats kind of sucks, and you can absolutely get knocked out. I've seen it myself in person, and of course there's loads and loads of footage out there, people getting knocked out from takedowns in sport competition. It does happen. And that's not nothing, right? But at the same time, that padding is there for a reason, right? It is, again, to make the environment less of a determining factor and make the skill more of a determining factor. I am not faulting sport at all for trying to level the playing field best they can, so that it really is a skill versus skill match. However, the environment is probably at play here. And then there is, in my opinion, and this in my opinion is actually probably the biggest predictor of this, is it's flawed offensive training. It is flawed application of takedowns. And what I mean by flawed application of takedowns, flawed offensive training, is that, one, the sporting rules that we are training under often disallow slamming. They definitely disallow spiking. They disallow a lot of the techniques that actually make takedowns extraordinarily effective as what they are, right? Because takedowns aren't just takedowns, right? Takedowns are not just a way to put a guy on the ground and gain a control position, though that's what they've kind of become. Takedowns have also been a way to hit somebody with the force of gravity against the planet. And that is a pretty strong, it's a pretty strong usage for what we are doing. And when your sport, and thus your training, disallows that kind of stuff, that's pretty neutering to the practice of the takedowns. But there's something even more damning here, and that is the fact that we have to train in a way that is sustainable and safe enough for us to train consistently, which means that we train to put people down on the ground safely. If we are training to do our takedowns in a manner that is safe and repeatable and recoverable, we are training takedowns in a neutered form that is not going to allow you to apply them correctly when the shit hits the fan. Flawed offensive training is a major part, in my opinion, of why takedowns work better in street fighting than they do in sport competition. And again, if we're taking at face value that the people in these street fights are low trained or untrained, not only do they not know how to fall well, not only is the environment against them, but the people doing the takedowns are not thinking about putting you down safely. They are not thinking about turning your body in a way that's going to give them a positional control. They're not thinking about obeying rules about spiking and slamming. They're not taking into any consideration your joint health or bone health or anything like that. If you break a collarbone, so be it. If you dislocate a knee or a shoulder, so be it. They don't think about that because that's not the point of a street fight. Street fight is not a test of skill by the same metric. And so when we're looking at this, you have to think that one of the big advantages that street fighters have in being untrained is that they're not putting you down safely because they haven't been trained to put you down safely. And if you think that safe training is going to lead to dangerous outcomes, it doesn't always work out like that. You know, I understand that, like in 1FC, we're seeing a lot more like standing elbows and stuff, but why don't we see near as many elbows and knees in MMA, especially standing elbows and knees in MMA? And why don't we see a lot of elbow and knee knockouts? Look, flying knee knockouts are great, but they're always highlight reel moments, right? They're not common. And a lot of it is because we have to train elbows and knees a lot more safely because it is very difficult to train them in sparring safely. So you have to do them more in pad work and other apparatus work. And then we have to play them very lightly in sparring and just hope that meshes. Well, this is going to be the same thing with takedowns. If you want your takedowns to be more dangerous, you have to practice the dangerous versions of them, which means you probably need a grappling dummy so that you can slam it in all of the nasty ways that you're not allowed to do in competition or training, because you would break your training partners, break the competitors, break the rules, and possibly break the law. And I'm not even saying any of those things are necessarily bad, but it is a limitation of the sport platform, of the friendly training platform, that really only gets made up in actual combat or with some kind of external apparatus training. And so you've got to make up for that, right? And if you want to do things where you're dumping people, spiking them on their head, neck, shoulder, whatever, busting up collarbones, dislocating shoulders and knees and hips, slamming legs against things or whatever, right? If you want to be throwing your throws with much greater violence, applying trips against the knee instead of against the hip or the ankle, right? A lot of these leg throws and hip throws, right, are technically better against the knee joint, but we don't do it because it's not safe for training and not safe for competition. And nobody would compete if they thought they were going to get, career-ending injuries, life-changing injuries every time that they got into an altercation. So again, I'm not necessarily knocking the practice, but it's a gap in the training that needs to probably be made up elsewhere if your concern is fighting outside of competition. And again, you probably need a grappling dummy that is somewhat at live weight, which a lot of people, look, it's difficult to find a life-size grappling dummy in the first place. They're expensive. The cheap ones don't hold up. I mean, I've got a cheap one, but and I've got it kind of heavy for a grappling dummy, but it's not like human heavy. If I wanted something in my weight, I need a 6'2" dummy, ideally probably even larger, just for the sake of argument, and something that's 275 pounds plus, maybe a 300-pound dummy, right? If I get a 6'5", 300-pound dummy, then I'm set. Where do you find one of those? That's a really hard thing to do. And then how do you find one that has maybe a rigid enough structure that you can actually load up in like a good fireman's carry, or name another technique, right, where you can spike the dummy down on its head and neck, or spike it on the point of its shoulder to dislocate or something like that. But we probably need something like that if your goal is to do stuff outside of just training, outside of competition, because throws can and should be dangerous. The fact that throws are a 50-50 toss-up in grappling competition is actually kind of shameful. And again, I don't think it is a fault of the concept of throws. I think it is the fault of our training and the environment to a degree, right? But our defensive training and a flawed offensive training together, the way that we do them currently makes throws a lot less dangerous than they could be or should be. So that's something to think about. And again, you can't do that dangerous stuff on your sparring partners because there's you can't break your sparring partners. Nobody's willing to compete against somebody who is going to disable them by the end of the fight. So you need something else. And that probably means, just like we do with elbows and knees, using pads and wall-mounted apparatuses and, heavy bags and stuff, we probably need grappling dummies that can facilitate those techniques at a reasonable weight and load, so that we can practice angling those techniques just right. And then again, if you're going to be a competitor, you have to separate the dangerous stuff from the sport ready stuff, because they're really not the same. And they're slight tweaks, but they're tweaks that matter. So look, I'm not an engineer. I don't know how to craft the perfect grappling dummy. And the idea that I'm running with here is you might actually need 3, 4, 5 different grappling dummies to suit different kinds of throws, because you might not be able to get a versatile posable skeleton like an artist dummy, right, that can be posable. You might not be able to get one of those that's resilient enough to throws and to the weight of things and all of that, that's done, that could be done in a reasonable way. At least I don't know how to do that. Maybe one day we will get training robots that help us with that, but we're still quite a ways away from that idea. So anyway, it's something to think about, right? Is it really that throws don't work? Or is it actually that we have a serious flaw in our application of throws? And I really do think it is the latter. I'm going to get out of here, and I will talk to you guys later, but I want you to mull it over. Give me some comments down below and let me know what you think. And yeah, I'll talk to you guys later. Good journey. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, share. Check us out on our other socials, and please head over to blacksunboxing.com to get a little more info, including how to contact us. Furthermore, if you are in the Phoenix area, please feel free to stop in, say hi, join in for a class, whatever. Also, if you ever see us cite sources or just for additional content, please check out our Substack. That is where we put all of the sources we use in our videos and is a major part of this. Plus, it serves as a membership platform for long distance learning and for people who would like to support us but aren't local. We would greatly appreciate it if you signed up. Even just the free membership helps us out a lot. All right, I will see you guys in the next video. Good journey.